Hey everyone, good afternoon. Ryan Tonking here from the Black Room here at T3. I wanted to jump on and do a part 2 of how to scan for stock patterns. Okay, patterns in the stock market. Okay, so yesterday we, in part 1, we did a brief introduction and then we talked about the developing a gaps list. Pre-market and how I set up my gaps list going into the open. We looked at some of the charts, how I set up some of the charts, how we got the gaps list, and we covered how I come into the market open. Okay, so today I wanted to do the second part of this video is the scanning for relative strength, relative weakness, right? And I do a couple other scanning, a couple other scans at somewhere between 10:30, right? Normally it's around 10:30 after I get on the mic, and most of the time I'll do some scanning while I'm on the mic. And so that's what we're going to jump into today. Okay, so today. This was the gaps list that I brought to the open. All right. We talked about how tier 1 goes up here. I put tier 2 here, then things that I'll watch for once they start the trend later today. Right. So there was only one thing that I liked today. That was the NLSN, and I did end up playing the NLSN, and I ended up taking a stop on the NLSN. This was a gap up here. We cleared. Nice intraday pattern. Wasn't the best, but it was okay. And it was a transition on the 1 minute. Let me go back to the 1 minute here. Okay, here was the entry, right? Entry above 2750, and then stop here, right? So we had a topping tail, failed to go lower, retested, and then we broke out. It was up about. It was almost exactly an R. I didn't take any. I was looking more for $28, and I ended up taking a stop on it. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I went after the favorite thing that I had, the NLSN, and it just didn't work out. The other thing that I took today was the STI, which we can look at because that came up after I scanned, okay, at 10:30. All right, so, yes, it was a little bit of a slow day, but the STI worked out really nicely. Okay, so I brought this list into the open, only liked the NLSN at the open, wasn't willing to play it over a doji bars high, so I didn't take the first entry. Once we got the second entry where he transitioned and broke out over the high of the day, I went long, and I ended up taking a stop on it, and that was it, right? So it was a really tough gaps list today, but I came in prepared, and there was only one thing that I was watching. All right, so I was able to stay focused, and that's what I went after. Okay, so now, once I have this gaps list, this is what I'm working off of roughly between 9:30 and at least 10 o'clock. All right, we talked yesterday about how the room is incredibly helpful for scanning, and I mentioned that there are a couple other people in the room that are really good scanners and contribute a lot. EFON contributes additional gap ups, right? So the room is incredibly helpful as far as the developing I mentioned that sorry about that. The volume came on in the background of this video. Okay, so there's a couple other members of the room that contribute a lot towards the gaps list and for additional watches and stuff, so being in the room is a great environment for that. All right, so between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, I'm looking for additional gaps. All right, so the scans that I do between 10 o'clock and 10:30 are as follows here. Okay, let me move this gaps list out of the way, and we will bring this list. This is from before. Let me see if I can put this behind. Okay, good. Should be able to see this. All right, so once I had the NLSN, right, these are the additional watches that I put on the list. All right, so here's the series of scans that I do. One is I scan for additional gaps. Now, if the market is not gapping and it's a slow environment, then I will scan for gaps that are 1% or more. Gap ups or gap downs that are 1% or more. All right, it'll give me a list of gaps. There's a couple scanners out there that'll give you a list and also charts of the gaps, which is a lot more helpful. But either way, I get the list of gaps and then I put them on a list, and then I flip through them to see and use the gap analysis to see if they're good gaps. All right, so the first thing that I do is I scan for additional gaps. In earnings season, when there's a whole ton of gaps, or if the market is gapping significantly, then I'll adjust that 2% or adjust that 1% to a 2%, right? Or if the market is gapping down 2%, well, then maybe I'll adjust the gap downs to 3% or more, right? Because I don't want to find anything that is gapping just in sympathy with the market. But then adversely, if the market is gapping down 2%, well, then I'll look for things that are only gapping up 1%, right? So the first scan for additional gaps, I will adjust that primarily how many results it spits out. Like if I get over 250 additional gaps, then I know that I need to adjust my percentages. Okay? So that's the first thing that I do. Now, here's an example. Here's IMMR, which was an additional gap that I was looking to play this morning. However, it just didn't set up right. Okay, so IMMR, you can see that here. That was an additional gap that I found. And this set up on the 2-minute here. And I was looking for a 2-minute buy setup on this, right? We got this red bar over this red bar, and then I was going to place the stop below this pivot if it could trigger. It didn't end up triggering, so I didn't end up taking the play. All right, but this was a nice 2-minute buy setup that was forming, and then once we got this red bar here, I got the confirmation to play this long. Okay, so this was an additional gap up that I didn't have before the market opened. C was another additional gap up that I didn't have before the market opened. Okay, and C actually set up a nice 1-minute buy setup that I got to a nice target, but I just didn't see it in time on the 1 minute. But EFON did put it out in the room, which was a really nice buy setup. The snap was an additional gap. Now, I did have this on another list before the market opened, but once I saw the weakness come into the snap after the market opened, then I was like, okay, I'm going to put this back on the list and look to play this short, okay? But pre-market, I was like, this isn't that high quality of a gap, so it's not even going to make my hot list, all right? So through the additional, but once it was a red bar and I saw it was trending lower and it broke $9, I was like, okay, this is going to go back on the list, all right? Now, so those are some of the additional gaps that I found. All right, so I scanned for additional gaps. Scan number 2 is I scanned for gap areas and gap bullies. Okay, so those are gaps that it's a lot more involved than this, but the scan that I use is a stock that gaps below the previous bar's low on the daily chart, and then its current high is above the previous bar's high. That's for a gap bully, right? So we got the that's just a picture. WDC was one of those. It gapped below the previous bar's low, and the high was above the previous bar's high, and that signaled a gap bully for me that came up on a scan. Okay, it was a very simple scan to do, and I got 3 results. The WDC, which I was talking about playing this. It was okay, but it certainly worked really nicely. When I was on the mic, I was talking about playing this long over the high of the day, stop right below this 5-minute pivot here, right? Got a really nice move there. I mean, probably 2.5 Rs or so. At least 2 Rs, even if you took some in this area here, right? So the scan did give me this gap bully, which did set up, and it was okay, right? It was an okay pattern. It's a little bit extended, and so I ended up passing. But I think that there were some people that were able to take advantage of this, and this came up from a scan at roughly about 10:15, right? So I got the WDC. In addition to that, the EXPE, which worked even better, which I didn't think that was that good, was long here, stop below this base, which ended up working really nicely. And those were the 2 things on my hot list as longs. and the EXPE also was a gap bully that came up, right? This was a little bit of a better gap bully. It just didn't set up intraday as nicely. And why did this come up? Because the stock opened below yesterday's low and it cleared yesterday's high, right? And I do the same thing for gap areas, although I don't think that I found any gap areas today. Okay, and there was one more. It was the ABBV, which wasn't good. I didn't like this. I deleted it off. I took it off the list. But the ABBV came up as well. Okay, and that was a gap bully. Now, so that's scan number 2. Scan number 1 is scanning for additional gaps that I missed, because some things don't present themselves as gapping before the market opens, but once the market opens, then they do end up gapping, right? The ABBV came up here, same thing, just because we broke above this prior candle's high, but there's a lot more than just, gapping down and breaking the prior candle's high. It's a little bit more involved than that, right? Which is why I threw the ABBV out, and it didn't follow through at all, okay? Now, additionally, 2 other things that were pretty nice. The Disca set up a buy setup. This is one of the strongest things that was out all day today, and this came up as far as my relative weakness and relative strength scan. Okay, so this scan is really simple as well, and I normally do this one coming into 10:30 because I'll scan on two different time frames, and all I'm basically looking for is relative strength or relative weakness compared to the market. Okay, so the Qs today just sold off all morning. Let me see if I can pull this chart down here. Right, so this is the Qs 5 minute. The Qs sold off all morning into a 10:30 low. All right, back down in towards the bottom of the base on the 60-minute chart. So what I was looking for is I was looking for relative strength, and so normally what I do is inside my stock universe, which is stocks that do an average of 300,000 shares or more, inside the stock universe, and they don't have ADRs in them as well, so they're US-based stocks, and there's a couple outliers that I have thrown out that don't trade very nicely, but roughly that's my stock universe. And also a big one is that they're over $3 in price. So in that stock universe, what I scan for is a stock that percent change from the open is up 2% or more, right? Super easy scan to do, and also has done more than 100,000 shares since the open, right? So it does 100K plus since the open, and we're up 2% or more, because I want to make sure that something has some decent volume that tells me that traders are interested in the stock, and I want something that moves roughly 2%, because 2% is what I found is kind of a threshold for, okay, there's a lot of interest in this stock. Now, the primary threshold comes from the chart, right? And so if we look at the chart, we had formed a wide range bar by 10:30 here, okay? So 30.36, we were up here. So we had formed a wide range bar, okay? The Disca I kept on the list because we were triggering a daily buy setup, and it was showing me a picture of power on the daily chart, okay? So the scan is 2% or more. And what I'm doing is I scan on the 5-minute chart to see if there's a 5-minute pattern that presents itself, and I also am scanning on the daily chart to see if there's a picture of power that presents itself. Anything that has a picture of power on the daily chart where we're triggering a daily pattern, whether we're gapping or something of that nature, right? Gap area, gap bully, triggering a daily pattern is something that is going to go on my list, because even if it doesn't have a pattern right now, it may set up later, right? The STI was one of those, okay? So the STI came up on relative weakness scan, okay? Wait for this to load here. And we were watching this, and it had already made the move and was bouncing off the lows, and I decided to pass on this sell setup here. Okay, so what I did take was, once we triggered this sell setup, we went sideways, and then all of a sudden we got this breakout failure here, right here on volume. See this 5-minute bar, this topping tail? And I saw this a little bit late, but I got this from my relative weakness scan because we were down 2% or more, and then we stayed weak as the market rallied. Once we got this topping tail, it presented a 5-minute sell setup, retesting this prior pivot, and then I went short under the topping tail, took half into the low of the day, took a quarter. It feels like it was too early, but at the time I was like, okay, I want to lock in another quarter, so I don't want to sit through a pullback, and then it worked really nicely lower, and I ended up covering the rest down here. It still looks, if we can break the low, it still looks okay, but 71 was the big target for me, so I ended up taking the last quarter here, right? And so here's another example of something that came up on the relative weakness scan that I didn't have, was a picture of power on the daily chart. We were failing on a daily buy setup, had relative weakness compared to the market because we stayed at the lows as the market made this big rally here, and then I waited for a pattern to present itself, and then that's when I was able to get into the short position, right? Breakout failure, retesting, and then got short, right? Was able to ride this 5-minute trend lower. Okay? So that's the 3 scans. All right, so real quick, just want to recap on this. One is coming into between 10 and 10:30, right? Depending how busy the morning is. Because I don't have time to scan on 1 and 2 minute time frames because there's normally too many gaps and too many things that I'm focusing on. Now, today wasn't necessarily that case because I only had the one gap that I was primarily focusing on. These things really had to do a lot of work to set up really nicely to get me to play, right? So I scanned for additional gaps. That's where we got the IMMR from. And then from additional gaps, I scanned for gap berries, gap bullies, which is where we got the WDC from, and a couple others. And then after that, I scanned for relative strength, relative weakness. If it has a picture of power on the daily chart like the STI, it ends up on the list, which you can see down here. The DENN was basing at the low of the day, and the HRTX, which Sammy had a really nice call on today as well. All of these were additional finds that came up from scanning additional gaps, gap areas, gap bullies, and relative strength, relative weakness, right? So that's kind of the approach that I take in my scanning at between 10 and 10:30, okay? So this is part 2. Just give me a second, just watching this CCI as it goes climactic here. So part 2 of the scans, is relative strength, relative weakness, additional gaps, gap areas, gap bullies, right? So tomorrow we will be talking about the 15-minute patterns that set up. So hopefully this is helpful to you guys in getting that list together for that, for me, really critical 10:30 time, 10:30 reversal time, where we can normally get a lot of nice continuation from the open. All right. As always, guys, stay in process. Let me know if you guys have any questions at all. And tomorrow we'll dive into 15-minute patterns. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope you guys have a great day. Take care.